we'll make a start now. So just thank you to anyone who's joining us either in the session or watching and catching up later. Today, we're going to have Anne and Alison mostly talking about something that's been in the works for a while. You might have heard of it, us discussing it before, but we're closer to the finish line this time around. So I'm going to hand over to Anne. I'll spotlight you, Anne, and I can actually spotlight Alison as well. You can be there in tandem. And you can just explain what this is all about and why we need it.
Thank you very much. That's cool. Hi, hello to people I don't know. My name's Anne Charles. I have never been to school and I am quite involved in the home education community still. I do support on various national groups. I was an admin for a very large group during lockdown that supported school parents navigating suddenly learning from home in remote distance pandemic learning. I'm a trustee for the Centre for Personalised Education, which specialises in academic research into alternative education. And I'm also a founder, director, volunteer and founder trustee for Home Education Law Project and the Joy Baker Fund, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So that's kind of me and where I come from. Very passionate about home education and making sure that the next generation is able to learn in a way that suits them and learn in freedom. And Alison? Oh, Alison, we can't quite hear you very well. I don't know.
I think move your microphone closer to your mouth. Still not.
Is it plugged in maybe? It was working a second ago, so maybe it's just a little dip in the vortex.
Can you hear me better now?
There we go. That's it.
Okay, yeah. Right. So I home educate. I've been a home educator since 1999. And I no longer home educate because in that time my kids have grown up. One of them went to school. I'm the chair of the Centre for Personalised Education, which Anne has already explained. I'm also involved in the Home Education Law Project that we're going to talk about. I'm a trustee elect of Human Scale Education as well. And I'm a paralegal and I've just been around forever. I'm also a home education researcher and a safeguarding researcher and paralegal. Anne, we had a question just asked just quickly before, and I think it's probably worth just elucidating what's happening around that.
That's probably a good idea. So we'll move into talking about kind of like the background and the context and what we're up to and why we think it's important and how we want everyone involved. But just before we started the recording, we had an excellent question from, is it Sandrine or Sandrine? I'm so sorry, Sandrine. Just concerned about some stuff that's happened in the last week. So Alison was about to launch into an explanation. Then I said, no, Alison, do it for the tape. So we had a question about in England there's been a private members bill being read proposing a register for home educators. So does that mean it's going to be law? Like, what does that mean? What's happening?
Okay, so this is all part of the attack on home education, and they want to tighten the thumb screws on home educators and box them into a certain type of a shape that probably looks like the national curriculum school at home. And it's all a big mixture of misunderstanding that education can be wider than the national curriculum, and also misunderstanding that children can actually be safe with their parents without people interfering. You know, there's that assumption that children are safe with their parents unless you have evidence to the contrary. We could wax on about that for ages, but that's where all of this comes from. They don't like the fact that home education is not controlled as much as they'd like it to be and does not look like the national curriculum. Now, what's happened is we did have the schools bill 2022, which was scrapped in the autumn, but the children not in school register has been brought forward again by Flick Drummond, who's a Conservative MP. And she's under the illusion that there are lots of children that people don't know about. It's not really the case anymore. She's under the illusion that home education is quite commonly not adequate or not suitable, which is the word that we use, and that's not true. There's all sorts of misinformation out there. She's also a supporter of this idea that there are ghost children, which certainly at the Centre for Personalised Education we very firmly say that the children that they refer to as ghost children are a mixture of cohorts. It causes confusion mixing the cohorts up, and actually those children that they refer to as ghost children are actually children who have been ghosted by the system, so that we know where they all are, or most of them are, and they've just been dropped like hot potatoes because nobody could be bothered or take responsibility for them or wanted to understand the actual reasons there were some issues with them going to school. So Flicks brought this bill forward. It went through on its first reading because nobody objected to it. That's not a surprise because the rhetoric means that lots of people have been conditioned to believe that this register is going to be important and it's going to find people we don't already know that they're there. It's all a nonsense. It's a logical nonsense apart from anything else, and a legal nightmare. And it went through on its first reading, and it's tabled for its second reading after the parliamentary session finishes. So the thing is that the parliamentary sessions, they're like school years, if you will, but in Parliament, they're Parliament years. And this session ends before that is tabled to come in. So we are 99.9% certain that it will just get scrapped. Okay, because it doesn't follow the rules, they can't fit it into the timetable, etc. And it's normal that anything that's left over as far as private members' bills are concerned gets chucked in the bin when the next session starts. So that's the first thing. But the bad news is that the DfE are wedded to the idea of having a children not in school register. They are absolutely convinced that this is a good idea. You know, some by hook or by crook, whether there's a Conservative or Labour government, it matters not. It doesn't matter who you vote for next time round, it will be on the table regardless. Okay, so we still have to fight the concept. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah,
it has been relentless.
So it's so true. So yeah, it has, and that's it's a good sort of segue because we were going to cover a bit of the kind of ground to how we've got here. Also to say that our wonderful Juliet, who's been doing amazing stuff with the conference, and like, yay, Juliet. Juliet is also involved as a trustee for Joy Baker Fund that we're going to be talking about, which is amazing. So we kind of so I just wanted to go through. Oh, sorry.
Just to add on to what Alison's saying is that the thing is we have to think very proactively now, because this isn't going to just go away, and if it does go away, it'll be very, very temporary. So we do have to become, and that's what brings us to where we are now.
Yeah, we have to think in terms of big action, both physical big action and legal big action, and all of those things.
Proper lobby. Yeah.
Proper lobby, and joining with groups that agree with us on this particular point. We don't have to join with a group that I'm not saying we should join with a bunch of racists or fascists or whatever, but what I am saying is there are groups out there, and Anne has links to one group in particular, that don't agree with the children not in school register as well, for very good reasons, and we need to join forces with anybody who can help us fight as a bigger group, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And obviously some of what we're going to talk about today, we also have to ride the line between organisations that can do political campaigning and charities that absolutely cannot, and we wouldn't dream of doing that, would we, Alison? No. If we're being with our charity trustee hats on. Anyway, so to kind of, I'll just talk very quickly a bit of the history and the background of like how we've got here, and then what the two organisations are that we're setting up, and a bit about why you might not have heard much about them so far, and then how you can help and how you can get involved. As always with things in the home education world, most of this boils down to home educators are fitting stuff in unpaid in the small hours, trying to do their best, and throughout history have been up against paid officials or paid lobby groups who have the time and the money and the resources and don't have the emotional trauma for trying to stop us from existing. And so for those of you who haven't been around forever or who are watching up or on catch up, just to put it all into context, if you go back into the history of education in the UK, until a couple of hundred years ago, it was perfectly normal that most children would learn with their families. Most children would learn in a family unit in the wider community. They would learn from life. They might, you know, if it would have been in those days, your dad was a baker, then you would have learned the skill of baking and he'd have been an apprentice baker and he'd have gone into the family business. You'd have learned skills that were relevant for your life and the community you lived in. And the aristocracy were probably off learning a bit through life, but then having their governess and their private tutor and then sending their children off to a, you know, university and boarding school and stuff like that. And then during the Industrial Revolution, well, the mass schooling system we have is actually based on the system the Prussians brought in because they were losing wars and wanted a more obedient population. And that also then suited the Victorians who wanted a workforce who, instead of working in agriculture and on farms and in their families, they wanted a workforce who could work in factories. So they brought in the idea that you went to this centre for learning, and you had a timetable and you had instructions and you did one sort of set of tasks, and then a bell would ring and you would change to another set of tasks, and that was getting you ready for going into a factory where a factory horn would toot and your shift would start and end. And so
the other thing that did as well was it freed up both parents to work, which was another thing. It doubled the workforce.
Yeah, so kind of the idea of let's prepare people for this new way of working, but we're going to take children away from the family environment and make that less of a common way of learning, although it was still around. And then you kind of get through to 1944 and the Education Act comes in that introduces things like grammar schools, and you also start to get some of the wording that's now still in our law today around parents having a duty to ensure that their child receives an education suitable to their age, ability and aptitude and to any special needs they may have, either by regular attendance at school or otherwise. So that or otherwise bit is the reason that we can home educate, or that you can choose to flexi school, or you can have a tutor, or you can do whatever you like, really, as long as your child is receiving an education that meets their age, ability and aptitude and any special needs they may have. So then you kind of get to the 1950s and you get a very brave woman. I mean, there might have been other people, but the one that we know about is called Joy Baker. And Joy Baker was in Norfolk and in East Anglia. She moved around a bit, but mainly was in Norfolk. And Joy had been raised, or Joy hadn't enjoyed her time at school. And Joy decided that, much as had happened in her grandparents' time and all family history before that, that she would educate her children at home. She thought she could do a better job, and she wanted to raise her children to be happy and confident and to be able to follow their own interests and to learn how to run a farm if that's what they wanted to do, and to do all of those things. And so Joy home educated, and Joy came up against all sorts of opposition from the local education authority, as they were called in those days. And Juliet's better at the history off the top of her head, because Juliet's looked into this much. I've read the books, but effectively Joy got taken to court a lot. At one point, some of her children got taken away from her, which was incredibly traumatic. Thankfully, they got reunited again. But Joy kept saying, no, the law says I can do this. You're not going to bully me out of this. I can do this. The local council can't just come round and decide how I'm going to educate my children unless they're not receiving an education. And I'm going to stand up for it.
Yeah.
And so
she challenged them on all the things that they kept asserting. So basically, like if they said, yes, but your children need to be in school because that's, you know, and then she would basically just challenge everything, and she didn't give them a thing that the law didn't say she had to give them. So
what we learn from this is that you really have to stand up and defend it, and also that parents and children have always had to know the law and always had to, you know, understand it in order to fight for this, not just for your own family but also for everyone else, because she stood up then and said no, I can do this. That then led the way to more and more people in the kind of the modern era of home education being allowed to do it. And so then in the 1970s, you started to get more people home educating, Education Otherwise. The charity was set up. But then as more people started to home educate, you also started to get more challenged. So in the early 80s, we had a case called Phillips v. Brown, which slightly muddied the waters about what the local authority could and couldn't do. And then in the 90s, we then started to get, there was the Parents' Charter where the government sent every parent in the country a document about the law, and it said you had to go to school. And I remember to this day my mum like racing down the stairs and phoning EO, and they managed to get the government to put an amendment slip into every single brochure that got sent to the parents, correcting the fact that they got this wrong and that you didn't have to go to school. We were having truancy sweeps in the early 2000s where children were, if they were out and about during the day, were and home educated, were being unlawfully taken to places of safety. You know, like we've had this stuff all the time when people have been trying to put a pincer movement in. The national curriculum came into schools in the 1990s, so we're now starting to get teachers who've never known anything but the national curriculum. But until then, teachers had much more control over what they could teach in state schools. 1996, we had the Education Act updated, so the bit that had been the 1944 Act is now in the 1996 Act if you're in England. We then in the late 2000s had the bad man era, for those of you who've been around for a long time. A review was conducted and proposals came in to say that home educators should be on a register, and home educators had to be seen, and home educators had to like pass assessments and things like that. And effectively, if you weren't going to do exactly what the government told you to do and to do school at home, you couldn't home educate. And home educators pushed back against that really hard. And the Conservative government at the time, because they were in opposition, were part of that and pushed back on this Labour policy. But then the people who lost that didn't really go away. They've been cross with us ever since. We've had other cases. We've had the Soleto case. And then the last few years, I kind of almost can't put a timeline on it because it has been so constant, but we've had various consultations with the Department for Education where they've put in suggestions for how guidance should be changed. And everyone in the home educating community has said, no, don't do that. It won't work. This undermines human rights law in this way. This is still the same problems we've been telling you about for the last 20 years. Don't do it. And then they published something that's terrible. And then we had the Education Select Committee consultation where before it even begun, the chair of the Select Committee had told everyone on national radio what he wanted the outcome to be. And they ignored all the evidence. And like 72%, 76%, something like that, of the respondents to the consultation, and in the high 80s of the respondents who were home educated, said, we don't want a register. We don't want any of this stuff. And they're like, we want to propose a register. So, and then we had in Scotland, we had the Scottish Named Persons legislation that eventually got overturned because it breached human rights law. But then in the last week, we've had a very similar thing pop up in Wales, where the Welsh statutory guidance has come in. I haven't yet gone through that line by line, but effectively it's really problematic. And it just puts more and more pressure on home educators, because as well as home educating, they're having to also push back in and look at legal remedy and just to fight to protect the basic idea, fundamental principles of law, innocent until proven guilty, that you don't, that the parents are responsible and the state is the parent of last resort. All of this stuff that's actually really important for everyone, every minority group in this country. We don't put minority groups on registers. We don't check up on people just in case they might possibly break a law. Like, this is really important stuff for the balance of our rights as a whole. And so there has just been a long kind of campaign to try and make it intolerable for home education to exist. And so we really need to make sure that home education is possible, and also to protect autonomous styles of home education, because if we protect a style of home education that allows the most choice possible, then if you do school at home, you're automatically protected. But at the moment, the move is very much to try and make it only possible to do homeschooling, you know, the national curriculum at home, and that isn't going to meet everyone's needs. So that's kind of the context as to where we are. And then in terms of what we can do about it, oh, and alongside that, we've had local authority officials who are completely untrained, who are increasingly causing problems for families across the country. There are only about 20 websites where the local authority has got the law right on their own website. People can be hired to administer the law around home education and have no training in home education law or pedagogy, or some areas we've even seen job adverts in the past where they've asked for people with bailiff experience, because bailiffs are used to getting unauthorized access to homes, rather than anyone with any experience of home education. So it's pretty bad. So then what are we going to do about it? So big issues that we've got at the moment for people are costs. So there's no real route to complain if you're being harassed by your local authority, because if you take it to the Ombudsman can only look at whether or not the local authority followed their policy. If the local authority's policy is unlawful, the Ombudsman's got nothing to say. They only look at were they following the policy. So that's not particularly just. We've got more and more families being taken to court. If you end up in the magistrates court, you can probably defend yourself. But if you get to a Crown Court or you're getting to the High Courts, and you might end up being in a position where case law gets made and law that affects everyone else in the country happens, you're probably going to need a barrister. If you want a legal opinion from a barrister, that can cost £5,000. In very rare cases, people might need to take a judicial review. We'd like to avoid that at all costs if we can, but if you do need to take a judicial review, that's starting at about £30,000. And I don't know about you, most home educators I know don't really have that down the back of the sofa. I'm hanging out with the wrong ones, obviously. If you know loads of people who've got a spare £1 million, send them my way. And then in parallel with that, we've got professionals who just aren't professional. They've got no training. They don't know what to do, and we don't really have enough barristers and solicitors that understand the law. So before the pandemic, so this has been going on 3 and a bit years, 4 years, a group of us got together from various organisations from representing different parts of the UK. So just kind of informally, we had people from Northern Ireland and Scotland and Wales and England, and had been involved in various charities and organisations. And we were sort of thinking, what can we do about this? And we sort of started off with a small group of people with the naive idea that having a small group of people to set things up would be quicker, and then we could kind of expand and get loads more people involved later. But it's been a long and torturous process, hasn't it, Alison, to get to where we are. So having talked about it in various different ways, I'll just share my screen. I'm really bad at slide design, so this is awful. But fundamentally, we've ended up with 2 organisations. So I'm just very briefly going to talk you through those and where we are with those, and then we can do kind of what's going on from here and how can you help. So we have ended up going, okay, we need 2 different organisations. So the first organisation is called Home Education Law Project, or HELP for short, and this is a not-for-profit company. And just to sort of reassure people, because sometimes people don't understand, a company, it doesn't have to be a business doesn't have to be a company is just a legal structure that allows you to exist and to have a bank account and to take money. So this will be not for profit. And the aim of Home Education Law Project will be that we'll be training professionals in the law. So local authority officials, social workers, lawyers, all of those kind of people. And we want to make sure that it's run by home educators, obviously that the legal stuff is accurate, but that we get the input from the community. We make sure that we're covering the stuff that you think they need to be trained about, and we're getting your stories and your examples of good practice and bad practice and how that affects you. And we're hoping that by training more professionals, that we'll reduce the need for legal action, and also we'll have more solicitors and barristers who understand this area, this quite niche area of law as well, in the unlikely event that we do need to take legal action. But you know, if we can nip it in the bud, because local authority officials realise that they're operating what's called ultra vires, kind of outside their powers, outside the law, then that would help, because we don't want to be going to court because it's stressful and expensive and horrible. However, separate to that, so a completely separate organisation, which doesn't yet exist because we have been in discussions with the Charity Commission for 18 months now, is Joy Baker Fund. So Joy Baker Fund, named in honour of Joy Baker, who we talked about earlier. Her family does know, but yeah, we wanted to honour her. We had to get special dispensation from the Financial Standards Authority to use the word fund in the title. We had to reassure them that we weren't going to be a merchant bank, which was very exciting. So this should be, we did have a big meeting with the Charity Commission last week. So we're hoping, fingers crossed, in the next month or so that they will register us as a charity. But this will be a charity that awards grants to home educators who are at risk of financial hardship to help them with legal fees. And it can also award grants to help the education of the general public in home education law. So for example, it could be that if you need a legal opinion from a
my bad.
It's okay. So it could be if you need a legal opinion from a barrister, something that costs quite a lot of money. that can sometimes nip a case in the bud, because, you know, a strongly worded letter from a barrister can help. So we could do a grant for that, but you can't do grants for political campaigning. So you can't, for example, do a campaign to change the law or something like that. But if you do have a family who's at risk of financial hardship and they're not able to get access to legal recourse, then it could provide grants for that, if it ever has any money, of course, because we also need donations. And the idea is that once we're set up, we will be recruiting a grant sort of subcommittee. So we'll have a panel of people from a really wide range of home educating backgrounds to make sure that, you know, because obviously if you're funding cases, it can have repercussions, and not every case would be one. Joy Baker Fund would not be taking cases. So Joy Baker Fund would be a grant funding organisation. So that's the kind of plan for Joy Baker Fund. So that's where we are, 2 organisations, one to look at training and one to look at grants. If Home Education Law Project makes any money, then some of that money profit can be donated to Joy Baker Fund as well, which is quite nice. So the next steps for Home Education Law Project are, we do have a website, but it's just a holding thing. We really need to sort out the website, and then we want to have an open session, or lots of open sessions, for home educators to contribute their ideas for what we should be training, what the needs are, to make sure that we get that included in the training courses. Of course, we have to be slightly realistic, because we all know that the officials probably need at least 5 years of in-depth training, and in the reality they're probably only going to be able to get like half a day because of the budgets that are available from local authorities. But we want to make sure that we're really involving the community in what's going on, so that you know what is being discussed. And then we need to do a trial course with hopefully some friendly local authorities to get some feedback and testimonials, and then we can start doing kind of paid for courses, which helps to fund the organisation. And then in parallel, we'd like to be training some solicitors and barristers, so that we've got more people who know home education law, so that we can start running a list of people who you might be able to go to if you need some legal help that's more than you can deal with on your own. And then the next steps for Joy Baker Fund are, we need to complete the charity registration process. And then once we've been registered as a charity, fingers crossed that'll happen, we then need to sort the bank account, which is another vortex of pain and paperwork. So that takes a while. And then we can kind of do a website and start doing more recruitment and publicity and fundraising. And obviously we then want to review and refine. So I'm aware that, you know, up until now it's just been slightly, we've been kind of dealing with all the admin and the stuff behind the scenes, and so that's not because it's trying to be secretive or anything like that. It's because we're all tired and we're all doing other things. There's been a delay with Home Education Law Project because the schools bill came in. So a year ago we were kind of gearing up to go, we're going to do our trial training and we're going to get the community involved, and then the schools bill happened, and so we all made a decision that it made no sense to create training materials if the law was about to change. And also a lot of us were involved very intensely in the fight against the schools bill, and there were only so many hours in the day, and it was better to try and stop the schools bill going through than to do the work on this. So we are fitting this around the rest of our commitments, but that's kind of where we are. And then the how you can help. Once we've got our website sorted out, we hope you can become a member, like give us a regular donation for Home Education Law Project. That would be great. And practical support is very welcome, especially if you are, or you know anyone who is a solicitor, a barrister, a paralegal. That would be incredible, whether that's a really in-depth commitment or whether it's just like occasionally reviewing some materials and going, yeah, that makes sense, that's legally compliant. We want lots of people to take part in the open sessions, and if you're interested in helping, then our email address is info@homeeducationlawproject.org.uk. And then for Joy Baker Fund, the next steps for that are, please have some patience while we finish the setup. You know, we're not going to be able to help with stuff straight away, and we won't be able to help every single case, and you know, it's going to be a learning process all round. But then donations and fundraising, someone calculated that if every home educator in the country donated £1 a month, then we would be an amazing you know, health in terms of having a fund ready to go. And we particularly will be needing fundraising volunteers and people who are good at that stuff, and people who like to be involved in the grants committee. And also ask us questions. You know, if you're not sure about something, the home education community sometimes has a dreadful habit of starting unnecessary rumours rather than just asking the people who are involved. Most of us, you know, we're all doing our best, we're all coming from a good place. And so we want to do this because we think it will make a difference. We don't want to take court cases like that as a real last resort, but I do think that it's right that if you are being threatened or harmed by your local authority, we know from people who've been in that position that on top of being in the middle of that behavior and trying to look after your family, trying to raise funds on top of that is really, really hard and really adds to the trauma you're experiencing. So if we can have some funds ready to go, that can just help alleviate some stress. But that's my brain dump of things. Alison and Juliet, and anyone got any questions? If we have time left, I was sneakily going to start getting Sandrine and Sam's ideas for what we should be doing, but I'll stop sharing for now. Does that make sense? Anyone got any questions or bits I missed? Oh, one thing I should just say is that Joy Baker Fund is not an insurance fund. So it's not that you pay in and we'll definitely fund your case or anything like that. It is just to be there to make sure that we've got a pot of money available so that if people do need legal support, then there is the option for that. And obviously if we get lots of applications at the same time, then the grant subcommittee are going to be having to look at prioritization, like what's the best use of charity funds and that kind of stuff, and also making sure that the cases are allowable under charity law, so we won't be able to fund everything. But is that all right?
Sandrine has a hand up.
Sandrine's got a hand up. Thank you. And I'm sorry for my terrible slide design. I am not good at graphics.
Yeah, it was a really it was great. I just think I think it would also be beneficial, and I know that a lot of us do it anyway, but just to do something to raise awareness, but awareness building within the actual home education community, because there are a lot of parents at the moment deregistering their children from school, just going to home education, and they're still in a very schooled mindset. A lot of them, and I hear this a lot when I go to home education groups, etc., I hear, and when I've talked, because I did sort of try to do my bit when it was the petition for against the register and everything.
Thank you so much for doing that.
I've heard this a lot. Well, why? I'm not sure that I want to campaign about that, or I'm not sure I even want to sign the petition, because I think the register would be a good thing, because surely this is home education parents.
If it saves one child.
Yeah, and it's like it doesn't save one child.
If it's protecting children, if surely if people are doing their jobs properly, and surely and this is what I've heard, there are some parents and families out there who aren't educating their children properly.
Yeah,
that's what I've heard,
and that's illegal, and we already have a law to deal with that. And I think if it protected children, if a register protected children, do you not think, in all honesty, all of us would be campaigning for it?
But what I'm trying to say is that these are comments that obviously none of that's what I believe.
No, yeah, I get you.
This is what I've heard a lot from within our own home education groups and communities, and that's worried me and concerned me more, if you like, than from outside of the home education communities. And I think it's because obviously when people have taken that philosophical decision to home educate their children from the start, they're coming from a different place. There are other people, my children did go to school until halfway through year 4 when the pandemic hit, but home education was already on my radar. I've got a background in education, but also in other things that so I'm aware of a lot of other issues. So, but there are a lot of people who have come from a different place, and that's that they've deregistered their children from school because school isn't working for them. But they're so wrapped up in this notion of what a proper education looks like, and they have to do the CGP workbooks, and they have to do the Twinkle worksheets or whatever it is. That CGP,
so you do you, but we all
and that well, surely they need GCSEs, and they need 5 GCSEs, and surely to go to college they really do need their GCSE maths and English, and if a family isn't doing that, then they're not educating their children properly. But these comments a lot of these sort of attitudes are coming from within our own community. So kind of like I couldn't help feeling previously when we were, trying to fight, fight the bill last year, that our communities were kind of almost like self-sabotaging.
Yeah, there was some of that, and I think the issue is that we know that some of those people in a few years' time will think totally differently, and that's what's really annoying, because they're just too early in the journey, and they don't really.
They need to sit
They
back.
haven't had enough freedom yet. They haven't had that proper taste.
Well, also they haven't yet. Sorry, I know Alison wants to get in, but yeah, I think it's that thing of we need to focus on the people who do get it, because we're protecting the people who don't get it as well.
Okay, so I can kind of merge Sam's question with this as well, because Sam said there's a lot of apathy within the home educating community as well, and it kind of joins in. It's some of it's part of the same problem, some of it isn't. So the problem is we've got a great deal of naivety now. Anne grew up in what you might call a radical household. So,
no, I didn't.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did.
If you've
they're home educated from birth. That's all you need.
But that was an accident. Yeah.
But even
and
so,
Anne was in early videos a long time ago. So yeah.
I know. Exactly. I've been around. I'm very old.
She's not as old as me and Juliet. Let's just say that. Right. So
speak for yourself.
Right. So basically, when we grew, I'm a child of the 1960s, and there was a lot more freedom. I'm a pre-national curriculum person. I did my teacher training before the national curriculum came in, but slowly over the last few years, parents have been led into this acceptance of the nanny state and this idea that families are not private anymore. So we already have the health visitor expecting to visit you at home. When I had my first child, the health visitor didn't come near your home unless you let her. Nowadays, the health visitor expects to visit you in your home before your child is born. The teacher comes from the school before you start school. There is this invasion of your home by a series of people that seems to be accepted, and there is an interference in your parenting which seems to be accepted very much more than when I was a child, for example. And there is an issue as well in that these people, so they're led into this, they've grown up with this, they think that is what education is, therefore that is, they don't have any knowledge outside of that. And I actually think people are more naive than ever. In the majority of the population is more naive than ever. They are so naive, it's unbelievable. And that's also, their naivety is why sometimes when things go wrong, they will buy into the conspiracy stuff.
But they've been drip fed. They've been drip fed certain things. So.
Absolutely. And so they will buy. So when things go wrong, they will reach for the nearest thing that makes it sound like it's going to be sorted out. So the freedom of the land movement, the FOTLs, that comes from that place as well, because people are so naive and don't understand how the law works and etc. And then somebody says to them, oh, you just have to say that you don't agree with the laws of the country, and then you can do whatever you like. And they go, ooh, that sounds good. So there is that naivety. They're used to being drip fed stuff and believing everything that they're seeing. We've also got the internet, which is full of lies and misinformation. And unless you are good at seeking out the truth, you can very easily be fed a load of codswallop, to use a very 1960s term. But that's where that comes from. The apathy comes from some of that, because they don't understand about fighting for their rights. One of the things I do with my Girl Guides, I'm a Girl Guide leader, is I bang on about the suffragettes every year. Remind them that people died so that they could vote. Remind them that protest is a really important thing. Remind them that campaigning is a really important thing. Remind them that looking after your rights is a really important thing. And we've had to do it throughout history. The revolts against the Corn Laws, everything. For centuries we've had to We've had the peasants' revolt. You know, there's all sorts has gone on. We've always had to do some of this, and people are led to believe that they are not capable of doing it as well. They're told that it won't be effective, therefore you shouldn't do it. So, I mean, how many times have you come across somebody, you said, can you sign this petition? And they've said, well, there's no point because they won't take any notice. There's no point in me voting because nothing will happen. And they don't understand that the strength is in numbers. The strength is in gathering together and in numbers and in campaigning and in making your voice heard. You have to shout louder than the other side, then you might get your voice heard, that kind of thing. But the apathy also comes from this post-COVID syndrome that we all have. We are exhausted. We are absolutely not functioning the way that we functioned before COVID. We still are not. We have to acknowledge that. We have to be kind to ourselves about that, because I've had to be kind to myself about that. Anne and I have talked about this. Well, I've talked about it with Juliet a lot as well. That people are not the same. They're really not the same as they were before COVID. And you know, we had 2 years of being told what to do. We had 2 years of our human rights being removed because of a pandemic. And people have just been sucked into it. So it's really about reminding people about history, I think, reminding them that protests can be effective, reminding them what Joy Baker did, what the suffragettes did, what a lot of other people have done. And saying that, you know, we have to get that back again, and that in actual fact, not having a one-size-fits-nobody education is an advantage, especially in a world where we all have to be flexible in modern times. We all have to be able to think on our feet. We have to be able to change direction. We have to have children who grow up into adults who know how to learn things, rather than that have a tank of knowledge. That tank of knowledge is almost irrelevant now, because things change every day. You know, they don't teach you about TikTok in school, do they? They don't teach you about you know, AI. All of those things. Well, exactly. AI is a massive thing at the moment. You know, they're talking about bringing in AI teaching.
And I think the point is that it's impossible to know everything there is to know, and teachers can't claim to know everything there is to know. So really,
yeah,
I think we're probably going slightly off course on Jean's question as well. I think it's a difficult one. I think that there's a natural curve. I think in the first 2 years of home education, people are learning so much about home education that really it's very hard, because it's about directing people to source documents, to go and read the law for yourself, go and understand this, or trust people who've been, you know who to trust, and trust people who've been before you when they're telling you stuff. But it's really hard, because it's like a lot of this is white supremacy, right, and white privilege, especially middle class privilege, that people still have faith in the authorities because they've never had a bad experience with them, and unless they've had a bad experience in the maternity services, which probably they have nowadays. But it's quite unsettling, because you want to think that there are some good people somewhere who are going to help the bad people, and you want to think that they spot bad people and that they never do an injustice to a good person, and that's quite a comforting thought. And if you have lived your life up until now, you've done the right things, you know, you've conformed, you've gone to school, you've got a skin color that's like considered acceptable,
and you've got nothing to hide,
and you've got nothing then you've probably never been on the receiving end of authorities malfunctioning, right? And when you become a home educator, you suddenly lose some of that privilege. And if you have other intersections as well, like you're working class, you're a single parent, you're Black, you're Muslim, right, you have all of these extra things. And so people who've never experienced that before, they don't want to go there with their brain, because that makes them feel very unsafe, and it's easier to kind of go, oh no, everything that I knew before is fine. And it takes a bit of a while for them to kind of see all the stories around them and go, my experience isn't the same as everyone else's experience. And that's a process, and you kind of have to have patience for that. But we can't, like, it's fine, like, we're in democracy, some people will disagree, that's totally fine, but I know how important it is to protect this, not just for home educators, but also for other minority groups. And so that's what I need to focus on, and we need to focus on people who want to do that. And I can do a light amount of education to pull people on side, but if people are adamant that they don't want it to happen, then that's up to them, right? Because if we don't join in to save this collectively, as we have done before, we're going to lose it. At the writing, you know, if you're looking at the pattern of what's happening right now, the pincers are coming in. The legal situation in France is very different, but bearing in mind in France, the kind of right to home educate got taken away like pretty much overnight a couple of months ago. It's a different legal structure here, which is why it's important to understand the legal framework in the UK. But you know, this is about human rights fundamentally, and not just for home educators, because this affects other communities as well.
Just one point about being on a list. So the Children Not in School Register is a list. It's basically a list. Okay. 2 points. 2 points. The first point is, if you don't know who people are, you can't put them on a list. It doesn't matter. Having a list will not find people who you don't already know about. Okay. So there's that dissonance going on in people's heads at the moment. The list will find people that we don't know about. Not true. The other thing is, every single serious case that's happened, you know, where serious harm has happened to a child who is home educated or at some point has been home educated, every single case in the last 10 years, the 10 years is all I can research, by the way, I can't go back any further, otherwise I'd probably say forever. Every single case, those children have already been on multiple lists. Being on a list did not protect them. Putting them on yet another list is not going to protect them. And there is a theory that the more lists you are on, the less likely you are to be helped, because everybody will believe it's somebody else's responsibility. Okay, so being on a list is not protective at all.
And you flood the system with false red flags as well.
Yep.
And then there's the data privacy aspect. But there's also the fact that it comes back around, Sandrine, to the lack of understanding of the law amongst home educators and professionals, because this whole rhetoric around lists has been coming along as though that's going to do anything or be useful. People forget that there are already laws in place that have existed for decades and work if followed. It's already against the law to not educate your child. Not educating your child is a serious crime. It's a criminal offence. There's already laws about that. It's already against the law to abuse your child. Of course it is. It's a terrible, appalling thing to do. There's no correlation between being home educated and abuse, by the way. That's another sort of myth.
What I'm just thinking that you know, because there's this almost prevailing schooled mindset within the home education community, because people haven't de-schooled themselves, you know, and it's about asking the question, what is education? I mean, Joy Baker did this brilliantly. You know, what is education? What does it mean to be educated? Is it something that you as a parent have to do to your child? And you know, there are just so many parents within our home education groups and communities that feel that, you know, they that is something they have to do to their child. So they have to get out the maths and the English workbooks. They have to
on that note, Sandrine, on that note, I advertise my session at 3:30 with Randall, because we are talking about a suitable education for every child, and that is one of the things that we speak about, is what is education, what should a suitable education look like. So
and this is also where we need to fight against the minimum standards rhetoric, because age, ability and aptitude into special educational needs is, the law demands a personalised education for every single child in this country. Personalised education. Minimum standards is a worse education.
Yes,
because it's not personalised.
Yes, that's right. And it can be and it's harmful.
Yeah. Yes. But if you're dealing with people, and the problem with all of this is that it's really it's nuanced and it's complicated, and it takes a few minutes to explain. And the bullet point of children are not safe and we will save them with a spreadsheet, well, those are two things that aren't true, but put together, I mean, it's very simple to understand, right?
Yeah, and the complete nonsense that is measuring children against an average, when quite a lot of the children who've been deregistered from school have unmet special needs, are already behind in school where they shouldn't already be behind in school. We've even got Ofsted going into schools right now, happened yesterday in a school local to me, a primary school local to me, going into schools and asking why their special needs children are not reaching the national curriculum average levels.
So this is the level we're dealing with right across the board, and it's really depressing. And I think some of the reason that there might be apathy, some of it's apathy and some of it's burnout. And this is another thing to say, you know, like some of the progress on doing this has been much slower than I like, but it's because we're fitting this in, you know, as I said before, we're fitting this in around our lives and and it's traumatic, right? Fighting the schools. But I don't have children at the moment, but like fighting the schools, building all of that stuff is traumatic. It's really hard. And
consultation launched today.
You know, yeah, and it's again and again.
Vulnerable children and attendance, improving support for children missing education. Yet again, I am going to have to write a response to another flipping consultation on the same bullshit.
On the same topic. And again, we're up, you know, and again, there's probably a separate conversation to be had at the moment. You know, these are not-for-profit organisations, all of that kind of stuff. But, you know, we do need, as a community, to have a mature and sensible discussion about how we are funding this our collective activism, because we can't keep carrying on you know, we are doing incredible things, considering it's a lot of exceedingly exhausted people writing emails at 2 a.m. And of course you can't always get hold of, you want to be able to represent as many views as you can, but understandably if you've got extra intersections, you know, you've got a disability, you've got medical issues, you've got all, it's harder still to be involved in activism, right? Because it's just exhausting all around. So we do need to talk about that and burnout, but I think you've got to feel like you've done something, right? Even if it's not perfect.
Just a little note on what Juliet said. You know, the MPs are, you know, and that they are spouting lies and stuff, but the MPs are only as good as the information that they're given. So we need to feed our MPs the truth. We need to work with our MPs, otherwise they stand up and represent us in Parliament because they've been fed nonsense by their party, rather than seeing us with our children doing a brilliant job. You know,
they cite inaccurate reports that we have gone through, and we've actually written to the people and said, you know, this is not right, you've got your facts wrong, and we've done FOIs and got this information. And I think that's the whole thing, is that, you know, it is constant, absolutely constant, and they are not interested in our nice, happy, positive stories. They are not interested, and so we have to, you know, we have to find another place to fight our battle, actually, because the positive stories are wonderful and we need to keep up with the improving our PR, but we also need to get numbers.
We need to
push that boundary and to hold our line, you know.
We need a media blast that basically says how lies are harming our children and our education system. We need that blast across the thing. We need to start saying there are so many lies. There are so many lies. There are so
I want to add that Alison and I have been having a little challenge on a Facebook thread somewhere to do with Flick Drummond's 10-minute rule bill, guy by the name Alex, and he said something about, you know, all these children need that it's important they get the education they deserve. And I challenged,
get that in school.
I challenged that. I said, so I don't think children in school are getting their education in they deserve. Would that they were. You know, it's like, this is what we're dealing with. It's people who think that Britain has this world-class education and you should be so lucky to go to an English school because your children will be like thriving and whatever. But there's a reason people are voting with their feet, and they need to, you know, look in their own backyard first, honestly.
Absolutely. On that note, Julia, that particular person, Mr. W, I am speaking to him at 4 p.m. live on the telephone. So I've managed to hook him in and I'm going to talk to him. So, yeah.
I don't know if we answered your question, Sandrina, if we just had a general rant.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, I think there were just so many conflicting issues within all of this, because, you know, with it, that it's a question of what is a suitable education and what's the outcome of a suitable education. What's a successful person, who, you know, what is success? Because the government would have it that, you know, the outcome of a suitable education is basically a financial bottom line. You know, it's what job can that young person get?
They don't even go
because-
that far, Sandrine. They don't
No.
even go that
Because,
far.
what
Their minimum standard is 5 GCSEs.
And is it 20%? Is this really high number of
25,
children don't get that in
25%.
their own system?
Yeah.
And
But-
like
but
and the failure rate for, if you talk about the failure rate for home education as being a kind of a successfully upheld school attendance order, then I think it's 0.02%. So
the point is that is, you know, GCSEs mean nothing. My children, my twin 12-year-old girls are fluent in French. Okay, they can speak, read and understand French fluently. They don't need a GCSE in French to prove that. It may be unlikely that they'll be able to get a GCSE in French, actually, because they have real problems, you know, with writing and working memory and stuff. So, but they can go to France, and they could probably now go to France and pass off. Well, you know, people think they're French. I mean, it's got.
that's great.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that it's just, I don't know, I've just, what I've picked up in the home ed community, there's almost like, and it's a bit of it's kind of like a disease in a way that's spreading. It's like, how many GCSEs can my child get? How many can they do early? You know, if they stagger them, if they start their GCSEs at age 11 or 12, how many can they get? And it's almost like within the home ed community, there's this thing of success. A successful education means like, how many GCSEs can you get? It's almost like, it feels to me, and I'm just saying, it's just a feeling that we're, as a community, we, like the collective we, are buying into this notion that a successful education means how many exams you can get, and can you get to Oxford or Cambridge, you know, with if you're a home educated child, or can you do medicine, or do you know what I mean, all of this. Well, actually, for some home educated children, a successful outcome from a suitable education might be, you know, being able to live an independent adult life with good mental health,
Yeah.
gainfully and meaningfully employed doing something that they enjoy. It might be something low paid, it might be self-employed, who knows, but that's a successful outcome. You know?
But I think, Sandrine, just to kind of tie in with Sam's point, because Sam says, I think part of the problem is we have reluctant home educators because they're here because they have no real alternative. But that's also why it's so important to fight, because it might not be your first choice, but at least it's a choice that you've got. And over time, you know, the majority of people come to home education because something's gone wrong at school. But then over time, a proportion of them after a couple of years will go, oh, hang on, I don't need to do school at home, and they'll discover kind of like the more autonomous style, and you know, if that suits their family, then that's great. And you know, for some people, school at home suits their family, and that's really awesome too. But they have a choice, and a choice is important to a democracy. We have to, you know, that we can tailor it to an individual child, or we can do, you know, a version of what school does, but just in a different location. But we have that choice, and that's the important thing, because if they don't fight for the choice to do the freer form of home education, then their choice to do their stricter form might not exist. And that's the point, you know, like, I'm really sorry if your school experience didn't work and you really would prefer your child to be in school, and like that's not okay, right? The schooling system needs to sort itself out too. But at least if, you know, if the schooling system's not going to sort it out in time for the mental well-being of your child, at least the moment you have a choice to do something different that might well save their life, I don't want that taken away, because I don't want more dead children.
Do you think that because it just feels, the opposition to what we're trying to do just sometimes feels really, really overwhelming.
It's the worst I've ever known it. And
or
the move to the right, the Overton window, like the middle ground, like 30 years ago, if you said there's a plan to put minority groups on a register, the instinct of most people in a friendship group would be, what? And now the instinct for a lot of people is like, oh, what do you mean they're not on the list? You know, and people forget the lessons of history at their peril. You know, like, and it's really important that we learn about not, you know, I don't think there's some like great plan in place to kind of like, I think there are people who don't like home education, but I think what you don't want, you need to resist rules that, if put in place, a more authoritarian government could use in a really bad way. Because it's not just about what this government might do, it's about having a legal framework in place that people could use in an even worse way. And we know from history that's how a lot of stuff happens, that not everything done in those kind of environments is illegal, it's done legally.
So,
But
who,
everyone
we
thinks
need-
it
we-
doesn't
oh,
affect
sorry.
them, and that's the point, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
it does
Yeah.
affect you
We
because
do
it
need to
affects-
wrap up. So
Yes,
Sandrine,
Alison's
have
got to
you
be in
a
another
last
room.
comment? Yeah.
yeah.
We do
I
need
have
to
3
wrap.
phone calls to make.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to wrap that up anyway. Obviously, you
Thank
know
you.
that Anne is the one kind of holding this in her hands, with the rest of us kind of like just
Slowly and
tagging along.
gently. Yeah.
So you know, look out for more announcements about it, and do sort of promote when you hear about it. If it comes out on groups and that kind of thing, you know, do make sure that you put the perspective on it if people are kind of questioning it. Yeah,
We're not trying to do anything on behalf of others. It's
No.
in support of, you know, our
Well,
community.
the thing is, no, people don't have to come and apply for a grant if they don't want to. They
No,
by
don't
all
have to
means go
donate any
court,
money.
you know? Yeah, you know, no, exactly. There's no one holding a gun to their head, and it is actually about freedom ultimately. And this country always stood for freedom, and you know, we may need to remind politicians of what that's all about.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Anne, for sharing about that. I hope you guys feel enlightened a little bit.
Oh, and just to say, we're not trying to tread on the toes of anyone else as well. You know, we're trying to work collaborative with people. It's not like, oh, well, we're doing this so no one else can do it. It's just,
Yeah.
it's just having another option.
And we have to start somewhere. We've spoken about this for too long, and now we do have to we can't afford to not do something practically about it.
Yeah.
So thank you, Anne, for all the hard work you've done, all the many nights slaving over terminology, and
Lots
Alison
of
as
people
well.
and
Thank you for the
lots of
hard work
wonderful
you've done
people.
around this. And we will see you around.
Thank you.
So take care.
Thank
Let me
you.
just